panted the kangaroo.
"Make a noise! Cry loud! Not safe yet!"
The little girl didn't understand why the kangaroo wanted her to make a noise, and she had, in her fear and sorrow, quite forgotten their pursuers. But now she turned and could hear the blacks urging on their dogs as they were making an attempt to skirt round the precipice and gain the other side of the chasm. So Dot did as she was told, and screamed and cried like the most naughty of children, and the gasping kangaroo told her to go on doing so. Then what seemed to Dot a very terrifying thing happened, for she soon heard other cries mingled with hers. From the desolate morass and from the gully and darkness below came the sound of a bellowing. She stopped crying and listened, and could hear those awesome voices all around, and the echoes made them still more hobgoblinish. The kangaroo's eyes brightened, and she restrained her panting and listened also.
"Go on,"
she said.
"We're safe now."
So Dot made more crying, and her noises and the others would have frightened anyone who had heard them in that lonely place, with the wind storming in the trees and the black clouds flying over the moon. It frightened the blackfellows directly. They stopped in their headlong speed, shouting together in their shrill voices, "The bunyip! The bunyip!" And they tumbled over one another in their hurry to get away from a place haunted, as they thought, by that wicked demon which they fear so much. At full speed they fled back to their camp, with the sound of Dot's cries and the mysterious bellowing noise following them on the breeze, and they never stopped running until they regained the light of their campfires. There they told the gins, in awestruck voices, how it had been no kangaroo they had hunted, but the bunyip, who had pretended to be one. And the black gin's eyes grew wider and wider, and they made strange noises and exclamations as they listened to the story of how the bunyip had led the huntsman to that dreadful place, how it had torn one of the dogs to pieces, and had leaped over the precipice into Dead Man's Gully, where it had cried like a pickaninny and bellowed like a bull. No one slept in the camp that night, and early next morning the whole tribe went away, being afraid to remain so near the haunt of the dreaded bunyip. Dot saw the flight of the blacks in the dim distance, and told the good news to the kangaroo, who, however, was too exhausted to rejoice at their escape. She still lay where she had fallen, gasping and with her tongue hanging down from her mouth like that of a dog. In vain Dot caressed her, and called her by endearing names. She lay quite still, as if unable to hear or feel. Dot's little heart swelled within her, and taking the poor animal's drooping head on her lap, she sat quite still and tearless, waiting in that solitude for her one friend to die, leaving her lonely and helpless. Presently she was startled by hearing a brisk voice.
"Then it was a human pickaninny after all. Well, my dear, what are you doing here?"
Dot turned her head without moving, and saw a little way behind her a brown bird on long legs, standing with its feet close together, with the self-satisfied air of a dancing master about to begin a lesson. Dot did not care for any other creature in the bush just then but her kangaroo, and the perky air of the bird annoyed her in her sorrow. Without answering, she bent her head closer, down to that of her poor friend, to see if her eyes were still shut, and wondered if they would ever open and look bright and gentle again. The little brown bird strutted with an important air to where it had a better view of Dot and her companion, and eyed them both in the same perky manner.
"Friend Kangaroo's in a bad way,"
it said.
"Why don't you do something sensible instead of messing about with its head?" "What can I do?"
whimpered Dot.
"Give it water and damp its skin, of course,"
said the little bird contemptuously.
"What fools humans are!"
exclaimed to itself.
"And I suppose you will tell me there is no water here when all the time you are sitting on a spring." "But I'm sitting on grass,"
said Dot, now fully attentive to the bird's remarks.
"Well, booby,"
sneered the bird,
"and under the grass is wet moss which, if you make a hole in it, will fill with water. Why, I'd do it myself in a moment, only your claws are better suited for the purpose than mine. Set about it at once," it
said sharply. In an instant Dot did what the bird directed, and thrust her little hands into the soft grass roots and moss, out of which water pressed as if from a sponge. She had soon made a little hole, and the most beautiful clear water welled up into it at once. Then in the hollows of her little hands she collected it, and dashed it over the kangaroo's parched tongue, and further instructed by the kindly, though rude little bird, she had soon well wetted the suffering animal's fur. Gradually the breathing of the kangaroo became less of an effort, her tongue moistened and returned to the mouth, and at last Dot saw with joy the brown eyes open, and she knew that her good friend was not going to die, but would get well again. Whilst all this took place, the little brown bird stood on one leg, with its head cocked on one side, watching the exhausted kangaroo's recovery with a comic expression of curiosity and conceit. When it spoke to Dot, it did so without any attempt at being polite, and Dot thought it the strangest possible creature, because it was really very kind in helping her to save the kangaroo's life, and yet it seemed to delight in spoiling its kind-heartedness by its rudeness. Afterwards the kangaroo told her that the little bittern is a really tender-hearted fellow, but he has an idea that kindness in rather small creatures provokes the contempt of the big ones. As he always wants to be thought a bigger bird than he is, he pretends to be hard-hearted by being rough. Consequently, nearly all the bush creatures simply regard him as a rude little bird, because bad manners are no proof of being grown up. Rather the contrary.
How do you feel now?
Asked the bittern, as the kangaroo presently struggled up and squatted rather feebly on her haunches, looking about in a somewhat dazed way.
I'm better now,
said the kangaroo.
but dear me, how everything seems to dance up and down.
She shut her eyes, for she felt giddy.
That was rather of a good jump of yours,
said the bittern patronizingly, as if jumps for life like that of Dot's kangaroo were made every day, and he was a judge of them.
Ah, I remember.
Said the kangaroo, opening her eyes again and looking round.
Where is Dot?
Humph! That's silly.
Exclaimed the bittern as Dot came forward, and she and the kangaroo rejoiced over each other's safety.
Much good she'd have been to you with the blacks and their dogs after you if we bitterns hadn't played the old trick of ours scaring them with our big voices. Hee hee hee!
It chuckled.
How they did run when we tuned up. They thought the bunyip had got them this time. Didn't we laugh?
It was very good of you,
said the kangaroo gratefully.
and it is not the first time you have saved kangaroos by your cleverness. I didn't know you bitterns were near, so I told Dot to make a noise in the hope of frightening them.
The bittern was really touched by the kangaroo's gratitude, and was delighted at being called clever, so it became still more ungracious.
You needn't trouble me with thanks.
It said indifferently.
We didn't do it to save you, but for our own fun. As for that little stupid,
It continued with a nod of the head towards Dot.
her squeals were no more good than the squeak of a tree frog in a bittern's beak.
But you were very kind,
Said Dot.
and showed me how to get water to save Kangaroo's life.
The bittern was greatly pleased at this praise, and in consequence it got still ruder, and making a face at Dot exclaimed,
Yah!
and stalked off. But when it had gone a few steps, it turned round and said to the kangaroo roughly,
If you hop that way, keeping to the side of that sedges, and go half a dozen small hops beyond that white gum tree, you'll find a little cave. It's dry and warm, and good enough for kangaroos.
and without waiting for thanks for this last kind act, it spread its wings and flew away. End of chapter 8. Recording by Graham, Theodore, Winona, and Ebony Jolliffe, Australia.